I'm John Sumser, and I'm going to tell you about some things that I learned. I've been measuring my, is this going to advance automatically?
Yes.
Good, there we go. I've been measuring my behavior with a computer for about 35 years now. This is the first PC, and with my first PC, I figured out how to get to work on time by measuring. I lived an hour away from the house and couldn't get there on time, so I used the computer. That turned into all of these other things, and I have spent my life in some ways using measurement as biofeedback. It's a really interesting thing to do, to measure what happens to you and turn it into improvement. And I thought that was what measurement was going to be all about in my life. It's not advancing. So anyhow, measurement led me to get an engineering certificate. I don't know that anybody in here will be familiar with logistics engineering, but I have one of the first 1,000 professional certificates from the Society of Logistics Engineers. And what logistics engineers do is project management and life cycle design based on human factors, fundamentally. So it's a large-scale design discipline, and that's what I'm good at. Now, this is Chagall's picture of Job, who's a biblical character. I assume some of you know who Job is. Job is this guy. God got mad at him one day and rained shit on Job for 20 years, I think. Some enormous, long time. And everything you can imagine happened to Job. He lost his wife, his family, his kids, the crops died, the house burned down. He got it back, it burned down again. And what I want to tell you about is my reign of hell that was like Job. It all started when I quit smoking. Bad idea. Since I quit smoking in 2004, every quarter for 7 years, it has rained shit on me. So asthma, heart disease, cancer twice, sleep apnea, diabetes. I recently got gout. My dad died, I got divorced, you name it. It burned up and went away over the course of the last 7 years. What happened that was interesting is that I've measured my way through this shitstorm, right? And I didn't really understand that that's what was happening for a very long time, right? This looks like a great story, doesn't it? But it wasn't until I got into this Princess and the Pea phase down about here when I was looking through all of these things that it might have been. Then I went, oh, maybe this is all one thing. Maybe this is one pea under the mattress and I'm the princess and I got to figure out what that thing is. So I had, because I measured stuff, and I measured and I measured and I measured stuff, I had the ability to go back through the history and start asking the question. And it wasn't easy and it wasn't obvious, and I'm still not sure that I have the answer, but because I was measuring, I was able to start asking really interesting questions. It turns out that this is my shout out to Kaiser, who provides great online services with data. All of the data that I have is measurements of symptoms. And that's how things work. I did all of these measures, but the way things work in American medicine is if you get a high enough score, you're awarded some pills. So you get a high enough blood pressure score, they've got all sorts of stuff, and it does weird crap to you. And if you get a high enough blood sugar score, you're a diabetic, and if you get a high enough uric acid score, you got gout. It's just like school. You got to pass the test, and then you get the reward. And so I measured that stuff. But here's what I learned. So this is diabetes. This is my blood glucose over the course of 3 years. I got diagnosed with diabetes. I lost 40 pounds. It's under control. 2 years, I don't really have diabetes. The red line is the score you got to get to be official. And then my dad dies. No change in diet, no change in exercise, and my blood sugar goes through the ceiling. Why? And so for the first 6 months of that, I went back through this process, tried to figure out what it was. I changed my diet, I changed my exercise. Nothing. My blood sugar and my blood pressure were through the ceiling. And so, what was it? Well, part of it was I thought that this was a food intake problem, and it turns out that's fundamentally an anxiety problem. And it turns out that you can get blood sugar and blood pressure from badly processing stress. So, what I want to tell you about walking away from that experience is that it's really important to understand that measures are like this, right? You're measuring something, but you don't know what it is. You can't really understand the insides of the thing that you're measuring from the points that shed the data. You got to start with the data and look deeper. You measure this stuff, you measure blood pressure, you measure blood sugar, you measure paces, you measure all sorts of crap, and they're outward manifestations of some sort of internal process, and the real question is about that internal process. A quick note. This is my blood sugar over the last year. Doesn't that look dramatic? Look how big this is. It's really exciting and big and kind of crummy down below the line, and that's the way that it felt. If you take the drama of the visualization away, what you see is it wasn't so far out of control, but there were episodes in here. And that what I want to tell you about this particular slide is that visualization makes a difference. How you visualize creates the experience of the measurement. Last thing, it would be great if disease had hour-long solutions after a lot of investigation and drama. The truth is, it's not so much like that. The truth is, I'm operating this body, and when I operate this body, it does stuff, and it's a dynamic system, and I can get clues about what's going on, but it's not what score did I get on the test. It's what's going on inside of my system, and how do I mend, improve, change, shift that around, and that's something that you have to derive from the scores. So I'll leave it at that.
So John, I'll start off with one question, which is, you've been tracking all this data. Did any of your doctors ever look at your data? Do they have any interest?
Fuck no. They eventually learned that I would beat them to death with it, so they just started doing what I told them to do, and that's an acceptable alternative.
Questions?
Yeah.
Way back?
What was the breakthrough?
Hypnotherapy. The breakthrough was I went to a guy who processes stress-related diseases with hypnotherapy and found out that there's a very common thing in people of my age. Birth meant being abruptly separated from nurturing at a time when patterning usually happens. And so I was born in a very military hospital, and the 10 or so hours around my birth, I was separated and isolated. And that's enough to set a default processing for anxiety as a baseline state rather than nurtured confidence as a baseline state.
Who's your hypnotherapist?
Huh?
Who's your hypnotherapist?
His name's Tony Madrid. He's up in Guerneville.
How much of your process do you think is self-reflective, self-discovery versus external searching for someone to help you interpret the information, such as meeting your hypnotherapist to help give you the breakthrough?
So I think that's a really good question. For me, measurement's got a kind of a loop to it, and the loop is the first thing that happens when you start measuring something is it gets separate from the experience of it. And then the second thing that happens is it becomes a sort of objective marker. Figuring out that you don't have a good enough question, I'm kind of a moron about that stuff, so I've got to screw things up for a while before I can figure out that what I need is somebody else to take a look at the stuff. And then, you can imagine this is a reasonably intense story, and not everybody wants to hear the whole thing. Um, so the shopping for people who have the patience to hear the story is an interesting process. It takes a while to find those kinds of people.
Okay.
Were some of the measurements, you're unusual in the sense that you have the time that you've been tracking and the intensity of that with which you're tracking is at the far end of the continuum of thoughts that we've heard
Right.
in the last 4 years. So you have some valuable experience, and I'd appreciate hearing whether some of the things you tracked were more valuable and than others, and sort of what did you learn about tracking itself that you could share with us? What are you really glad that you tracked? What things that you tracked maybe are you thinking, I still haven't learned how to use that data? That sort of thing.
So
Expose some of that.
this stuff is interesting because it's so close to medicine, right? So I have tried forever to track my blood pressure, but every time I get close to it, it spikes. It spikes because I'm trying to measure it because I'm scared that it's going to be high. And so it's of no use to me, and that loop of forcing myself to go try to measure it and then being flipped out because it's stratospheric is a challenge that I would love to figure out an answer to. The other thing is I have a problem that's more like I got this ton of data and I can't really get it to lay on top of each other. And there are things that I'm very curious about, but because the time scales, so I have every breath I've taken in my bed for 7 years because I have a smart card on the sleep apnea machine. I'm really interested to see how the apnea events line up with the Zio and Fitbit scores for breathing. Real interested in that, but that's a huge, complex overlay problem that doesn't work with any tool that I have access to. So that's a piece. There's a lot of stuff on the floor from Kaiser because Kaiser doesn't have an output API. So you can look at the data in Kaiser and it's great for that and it's way better than anything else that's out there, but I can't get it into a spreadsheet to massage it. So those are primary things. I think you learn things. So I have gout now, and I have gout because diuretics plus a low-carb diet mean acidic blood. And you can solve gout pretty easily, but it would have been nice to have somebody who was watching me drive my blood sugar down with low carbs go, you're taking diuretics and gout's really painful. Don't do that. So coaching would have been fantastic. Yes?
I wanted to know how you thought about being consistent and peak, because you had all of this data. What made you think to look for something that was going to define underlying?
You know what? I eventually figured out that if God was mad at me, it didn't really matter, and that I needed to do something. And everything. So the experience was, I'd get diagnosed with something, I'd get on the track to solving it, and the next thing would come up. And it was depressing. And I don't like being depressed, so I had to come around and find something underneath it. And when my dad died, and my blood sugar defied every measure that I'd found to control it, that was really the switch tripper. It got confusing, but it was the switch tripper. Thank you, Ryan.
So, I mean, overall, would you say that this tracking has helped you or not? I mean, it's clearly that at the end of the day, you've kind of reached this breakthrough and you've kind of seen through like the kind of gestalt, like put it all together. But during the journey, did you feel, was it, I mean, I think...
Oh yeah, it was astonishingly helpful because in chaos like that, rhythm and ritual and routine are powerful navigation tools, right? When it's just impossible to retain anything like a self-concept because you're navigating all of this stuff, knowing that I get up in the morning and I measure my blood sugar and that the day gets checked off because that stuff is there, that's enough to do it, right? And it's powerful behavioral therapy even if there's no answer, because well, me.
You can finish your answer.
That happened. So I think it's really, really useful, but it may be that measurement, the actual measurement, is the last thing that's useful about it.
Sean, thanks.
Thanks.